to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book, Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today, we've got something a little bit different. We're going to speak with RJ Harper, who has been on the podcast before, but who is also someone who survived the Twin Towers attack, not just once, but twice. And it's obviously something that would have shaped his life and which will have had all sorts of emotions associated with it. So, hi, RJ.
Sophie, it's so good to be back on your podcast. Thanks again for having me.
No worries at all. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first for people who don't know you?
So I am a World Trade Center survivor. I'm in the New York City area. I'm a former investment banker from Goldman Sachs, where I worked in the investment banking group down in the Wall Street area. And for a time, I was a regular guest on MSNBC as a financial commentator on the financial markets globally. So I've had a background on Wall Street, and in my journey, having worked down in that area, I've had to come through the World Trade Center for many, many years as part of my work life. So for me, I'd been very much so invested, in my career in banking, such that being down in the Wall Street area was just a very big part of my career in my life. And that's all very much so changed in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm.
So if we start with the most recent attack, the one that people mainly know, which is 9/11, right. Can you tell us what happened that day and how you viewed it and what you experienced, how you lived it?
So on September 11th, 2001, I was living in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I take a commuter train, like many hundreds of thousands of people do every day, into the World Trade Center. And my job was a block away from the World Trade Center at the time. Mm-hmm. So I would be required to go through the World Trade Center as a major transportation hub to get to my job, which was about a block away on Maiden Lane. And at the time, I was a consultant with an Italian bank. So I was running a little bit late that day. And typically, if you're working on Wall Street, being there a little bit earlier than 9 o'clock is obviously very much so preferred. Yeah. So in my case, I was going to be on time, but I was going to be slightly later than I typically would get into the office. Mm-hmm. And it turns out, the trains that what I was required to take, it's called the New Jersey Path train. So on that morning, I was on one of the last PATH trains that made it through the terminals, the underwater terminals where the trains enter into the World Trade Center. Yeah. And that was the time in which the second plane hit the building.
Okay.
Right.
So did you know that at the time?
I did not. I mean, we came through there as one of the last trains to come out of there. So it was, for me, something that we just, because of how big the buildings are and how, we just had no idea what was really going on. When we came through, we realized something was, happening, but we just thought with the crazy rush of what New York is, something was happening. And many of the people are so focused on getting to work that, you just would not have really known all of the details of what happened. And then there was speculation, a plane hit the building. Many people, like you can imagine, they thought it was a little prop plane or some little commuter or something, right? So the gravity of what the planes hitting the building meant for many people at that time just didn't sink in, and people were still going up in elevators, assuming that everything was okay, only because there was no good guidance.
And I think the thing as well, I remember I was watching it on TV when the second plane hit the tower.
Yeah.
And at that point, first of all, there was no internet like there is now.
Sure.
There also, we didn't know that it was happening in other places in the States too.
Right.
So yeah. I think there's an element, so I can imagine being underground, you just would not have had a clue.
Right, absolutely not. And even though, some people were running around, a plane hit the building, like, there's just no
comprehension that it's gone through.
Right, it's gone through, or that a jumbo jet type plane hit the building, right? And even if that were the case, like, the building is still standing, so obviously, it can't be that bad, right? You would expect blaring sirens and right, those kinds of things were kind of happening, but you're in the building, so you're immune to just understanding all the chaos that's going on around outside.
So what happened after that?
So for me, what happened is I had made it over to part of I made it outside of the building, because I kind of wanted to see like what are they talking about, right? The plane hit the building, blah, blah, blah. And so getting out of the building through a sort of side way allowed me to kind of see like what potentially was happening. And then I saw all the scrambling of the people. And then that's when I really woke up to the idea that this was really, like no good news, but like a very dangerous place. Mm-hmm. Because I saw glass falling from like the 90th floor. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized like even going out of the building was going to be very dangerous, right? And I stepped in a direction that I knew would be outside the potential danger zone, right, of what I thought would be the case. And I got around to an area where there's a park, and there was a ambulance parked there with some responders there. And so because of all of the dust and debris and things like that, I went over to the ambulance people and told them that I had been exposed to the air that was very sort of toxic with the gasoline smells, mm-hmm. right? And they put me on an oxygen mask and told me just to sit right near the ambulance. And then as they were bringing other people over, eventually they put us into an ambulance, mm-hmm. and they closed the door. And we were having oxygen administered to ourselves. And then essentially, and I don't know how long it was that we were in there, but at one point, not long after that, because I was literally just laying, stretched out with a breathing mask on, right, mm-hmm. with some other people, and we were talking in the back of the ambulance about what had happened. And then and then out of nowhere, an EMS worker threw the doors of the back of the ambulance open and said, "Get out, run for your life. The buildings are collapsing." Mm-hmm. So I threw the mask off and I, jumped out of the ambulance, and I looked up, and at that moment I could see the beginning of the World Trade Center collapsing. Mm-hmm. And like the adrenaline rush that I experienced at that moment, where I just knew I was going to die. Mm-hmm. No way, I was going to outrun a 100-story building. So people were screaming, and it was shock. People were,
kind of running in all directions at the same time.
All directions, no rhyme or reason as to, which way to run. And you really did feel like you only had moments to make the right decision, about which thing to do. So I just had, for whatever reason, by the grace of God, the presence of mind, mm-hmm. Let's think, if the building is falling to the left, right, run to the right. Right? Maybe you've got a chance somehow, And so that's essentially what I did. So I stood there for, about 10 seconds trying to calculate, like, where's this building going to fall? And if anything, I'm going to run in the opposite direction. So that's what I did. And I just began to run at top speed. And people were pushing. There was chaos, about what was happening. And because the buildings are so large, it's actually not even possible to see the World Trade Center from down in the sort of belly of the other buildings as you're running between them. So part of my view was this building, the World Trade Center falling, they're going to fall on other buildings, So even if you're running away, you run the risk of another building that's going to be hit, So I just began to run and run and run. I was so panicked. And at one point I fell, right? And I kind of looked back and I could see this large dust cloud coming, because the building fell, and it fell rather quickly, and it was still falling even as the dust cloud was coming. So I ran and ran, and I was eventually overcome by the dust cloud. But prior to that happening, I pulled my shirt over my face. It was enough for me to be able to see, and I tried to just continue and run and run. A few other things kind of happened, and I eventually made it away from the World Trade Center and got over to a kind of large crowd of people who had made it over to the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, where we could kind of see like this large dust cloud happening. It was a little bit of a safe zone because smoke didn't actually get there, but I was covered in smoke.
Yeah.
So I realized at that point that, this was, I mean, I thought it was some sort of World War III scenario, because there were this sense of shock that the whole World Trade Center had fallen. I was literally down there. And the numbers of people that I, witnessed jumping out of the windows and just like complete shock. I can't even tell you how much that was an issue. So from there, I started to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, and then someone told me that there were still planes missing. And so because there were literally hundreds of thousands of people walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, I made the conscious decision not to get on the bridge because there was a possibility that another plane could show up and run into the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And send all of those people into the into the Hudson River. So there was a New York Times reporter on the bridge kind of taking pictures. And I asked him what was going on. He said, yes, in fact, there are planes still missing. And he asked me, can I take your picture? So I said, okay. So I stood there kind of with my thing on my head, and he took my picture in the dust cloud. And then he gave me his business card, and he said, stay in touch with me. I want to talk with you. So at that point, I walked over to another ambulance, and that ambulance whisked me away with other people to a hospital on the Upper West Side. And as we were going on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, people were sitting out with their coffees, like nothing had happened. I mean, it was far enough away that there were people that were theoretically just
didn't know, sort of thing.
Well, you could tell that they knew, but they couldn't do anything. It'd be the equivalent of like a bomb blast a mile from your house, right? If you're sitting out having coffee and you heard that it was some bomb blast a mile from your house, is that going to really make you stop drinking your coffee? Probably not. Like, you're going to, wow, that's a bad thing that happened over there or down there, right? But, 50 blocks away, like Manhattan was functioning like nothing had happened. It was so scary. But what I realized was that there were a number of yellow taxi cars that were just parked, and there was nobody driving them. Right. And what I realized was that a lot of the Muslim taxi drivers had run to their mosques and abandoned their taxis in the middle of the streets. So I got to the hospital, was administered oxygen. There was a number of lawyers in the hospital. And then miraculously, my cell phone rang. And it was a producer from NBC. And he called me, his name was Steve Lefkowitz, and he was like, RJ, like, are you okay? Like, And I'm like, yes, Steve. But I'm like, how is my phone even working? I've been trying to call my mother and my dad, and I can't get service, and your phone rings. He's like, listen, I'm at MSNBC. We can help you. The main broadcaster from NBC would like to talk to you on television live. Are you okay enough to come to the NBC studios? And I'm like, no. I'm on oxygen mask. I'm shocked that you're calling me. He's like, well, I mean, are you injured? And I said, no. And he said, well, we'll send a limo to the hospitals. We'll come to NBC. We'll take care of you. So within 15 minutes, I was in a limo shooting up to the NBC studios.
It's a bit mad, isn't it?
Completely nuts, Sophie. I can't tell you. And 45 minutes later, I'm in the NBC studios covered in dust, and I'm on with Tom Brokaw, the biggest broadcaster, in NBC, history, talking about what my experience had been, essentially 2 hours or, prior to that situation happening. And I ended up spending the night at the NBC studios because the mayor had closed all the bridges and tunnels to get home. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened on 9/11 for me. Very scary. Scary.
And obviously, it wasn't the first time.
So for me, it was not. I mean, in fact, back during the first World Trade Center bombing, I was working for a company called Fuji Bank.
Which was in, because some people don't actually know about it. It was April 93, if I remember rightly.
Right.
I was actually there, not on the day, but the week before.
Okay.
At the World Trade Center, funny enough.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. So I was working on the 80th floor at the time, and Fuji Bank, and I felt the building rock, and literally, everybody that had ever worked in that building knows that the building sways. Has been told that the building sways a little bit, mm-hmm. But on that particular day, the building completely swayed. And I just had visions of this building going into the Hudson River. It swayed enough that I was like that.
Kind of feeling seasick, so to speak, where you just kind of lose your footing.
Yeah. Right. So the idea that the building swayed that much made me know that, it's a miracle I'm alive, given that this building swayed. The employees got an announcement that the building had been struck by lightning and everyone should go back to work. And some people went back to work, and I was like, I'm not going back to work. I'm getting out of this building right now. And I walked over to look at the elevators, and the elevators were billowing black smoke at the time.
Right.
And the other employees had no idea, and several of them just went back to work and clearly had no idea. I then walked to the exit sign, and as I pushed the door to the exit, 25,000 people were running down that stairway, and the door was slammed back to me. And I looked down the hallway, and I could see multiple employees still sitting at their desk, completely unaware mm-hmm. of what was transpiring in the hallways of the building. And I couldn't even. It was so crazy in that stairwell, I couldn't even enter. People were, as I tried to open, people were closing the door. So I knew that stairwell was probably not going to be a good place to go into. And I just decided, let me try a completely different stairwell. So I ran to the other side of the building. There was no receptionist. The receptionist was gone. Security was gone, right? I ran past this whole thing, and there were people sitting at their desks still working, like loyal employees. And
you just say to them,
Well, so the thing is, on your job, when you start yelling, get out of here, right? That'll start a panic. Right? We were told that it was only lightning, right? If I started to panic by saying get out of the building, I had no evidence that it was nothing other than lightning, right?
Yeah, true.
But if I started yelling, people are running out of the building, I would have caused a panic, right? So I was thinking about self-preservation, as many people in that moment are doing, right? The supervisor telling everyone go back to work, right?
And the thing as well, you just don't know how you're going to react in emergencies, do you?
You don't. So some people went back to work trying to be good employees. They're under the assumption that, they're telling us don't panic, right? You don't want to start a panic naturally, right? But I'm into self-preservation. So I ran to the other stairwell, and Sophie, that stairwell was completely empty. And what it reminded me of and made me aware of is that typically what happens in a situation of a major panic, everybody does the same thing.
Yeah.
It appeared that everybody above us, was running to the same stairwell. And that's the reason why that one stairwell was so crowded. And yet, if somebody had just thought, go to another stairwell. Like you could have had, so I had a free flow to run from the 80th floor to the 30th floor, right? Uninterrupted and unimpeded. While in another stairwell, 50 yards away, 25,000 people were trying to go up and down that stairs, right? So I got to about the 30th floor, and the smoke and the congestion in the stairwells was so much that I was unable to bear, right? Doing that because I was so, my adrenaline was so high. I was literally like jumping down the stairs, like grabbing the railing and just jumping as best as I could.
So kind of not even catching your breath, and then
not catching my breath and completely unaware of how much of the smoke I was inhaling at the time, right? But more importantly, I think what you should also know is in 9/11, because those buildings were owned by the World Trade Center, there were no lights in the stairwell, right? And in my subsequent investigation of how that could have happened, we've learned that the Port Authority, who was the owners of the buildings, felt like this building is invincible. Why are we going to put a whole bunch of lights in the stairwell, right, and run up a big electricity bill when it's the World Trade Center?
So you were running in darkness.
Running in darkness, right? And the only thing that you were able to see was every fourth floor was the red exit signs, right, that would have been required. But there were no, quote unquote, lights in the stairwell at all. So you're literally running into hell. And you can hear people down below you screaming, right, from time to time, because someone would, and even in my case, like I almost twisted my ankle, right, trying to run. And it's 50 flights of stairs. So in the darkness of missing a step, running, the panic, not knowing what had happened. And then by the time I got down to 30, there were other people down there. People had fallen. People had pushed one another. It got congested at around the 30th floor because then other people like me had discovered that stairwell. There was shoving. There was a pregnant woman, I remember, walking past her, that she had been knocked over by some big executive from her company, People were elbowing one another. Wall Street is a bunch of type A personalities, right? Aggressive, go types. So you couldn't really see who was who. And eventually I had to get out of that stairwell. So at that point, someone came into the stairwell from around the 32nd floor, and the light opened up, and I grabbed the door and I went onto that floor. And within like 2 or 3 minutes, I passed out. Mm-hmm. And I woke up hours later being taken out of the building over the back of a New York City firefighter.
Right. And how would you say these experiences have changed you?
So they've changed me completely. My career trajectory has changed, 180 degrees. My notion of just how people react to one another in an emergency is shocking.
Yeah.
Only someone who has been through some sort of traumatic experience like that, particularly in a place like New York City where people can be really aggressive, can fully appreciate the level of panic when your life is threatened in that way, and particularly because you are in the dark trying to figure out, exactly what to do. The building could be collapsing. You could be trampled upon. I happen to be in good shape, but it was just the nightmare of not knowing when and if you're going to get out of this space, and the adrenaline of just you make one wrong move and you could be dead.
Yeah.
I got off on that floor, and there was a lot of dust and debris on that floor, but it was just physically impossible for me to be able to do anything else. I couldn't breathe anymore, you know? So that, for me, that was it. Like, I just, you know, I knew that I was fainting, and there was nothing else I could do. I was like, I'm fainting. And then I just, bam, on the floor, you know?
Yeah.
I remember sort of potentially kind of maybe waking up a little bit, right? But, you know, I was pretty much out. And you know, the amount of stuff that I breathed in at the point, you know, I was like, this is it. And
it's obviously changed you as a person. Obviously, I met you a year ago now, and it was certainly not as a banker. But how do you think, you know, what did you do to, I'm not going to say turn it into a positive, so to speak, but to make it worthwhile, and what did it do? Because I know that sometimes people go through traumatic experiences but don't know how to handle it.
So my first World Trade Center experience was actually that I didn't know how to handle it. In fact, the next day, I spent a couple of days in the hospital after that. Naturally, my family was very worried. I took the high road and was telling everybody, I'm fine, I'm out of the hospital, I wasn't injured. And I got home, and I just, you know, tried to go back to just living my regular life. But I was very much so traumatized by that. And I would say to any person who ever experiences something like that, it's so important to get help, psychological help. I didn't do that, and that's one of my major regrets during that time period, because I was severely depressed and I didn't even know it. And for about a year, I was very depressed, to the point that it caused me to do some things that were harmful to myself, right? And coping mechanisms around drinking and just being depressed and not really understanding those things. And I realized that, particularly as a man, we're kind of oriented around the idea of, you know, like, just, you know, dust yourself off and keep going. And I did that and maintained this stiff upper lip, right? Of just how to go about doing these things. But I was very much so depressed around what had happened, and traumatized by what I had seen and what I'd experienced, and found myself spending a lot of time alone, being self-destructive, you know, in ways that I look back now and realize, you know, I was dealing with that. So I would say, it's so important, you know, particularly for men to just think about the notion that, you know, getting help from a psychiatrist or a psychologist about your traumas, it's just so necessary. And I wish that I had done that. And I would encourage anybody, you know what I mean, not men in particular, but, you know, anybody, to just seek out those services. And I say that mainly because the way that it was sort of, you know, couched with me was that, you know, if I break my leg, I go see a leg doctor, right?
Yeah.
If I get an ear infection, I go see an ear doctor. But if I break my brain, right?
What do I do? I know. And this is a thing. A lot of people think, oh, you'd be all right, you know, just put it to the back of your head. But unfortunately, the back of your head just leaks out, and it comes in dreams. It comes when you don't expect it.
Right. So that was very profound for me, because you know, I mean, who wants to wake up thinking like my brain got a little broken, right? Yeah. But that's what trauma is, that it breaks your brain a little bit, right? So just like you have to put on a cast and try to heal and, you know, keep your leg up when you have a cast on, right? You know, there's things that you need to do to just get your brain back on track. I mean, the adrenaline rush and all the chemicals that come from that high level of trauma, I mean, it just opens up brand new pathways and neurons in your brain that didn't exist before. So you're left with a different brain, right? That's a reality, you know, that takes a long time for people to even wake up to. And even, you know, 15, 20 years later, like the trauma of talking about this, right? Even for myself, like it's still very palpable for me in ways that, as much as I've healed in many, many ways, right? I can't talk about the World Trade Center situation without my eyes tearing up. Like, it's just like, I tried to stop it, right? The panic of whatever that was, it's just so real for me in ways that, even with any kinds of additional help that I've gotten from therapists, right? Like nobody knows. Like this, I can't tell you, like,
I think the thing as well, as you're telling the story, I'm seeing it, if you know what I mean. And this is the thing, you're reliving it, aren't you?
Oh my gosh.
Which is why I'm so grateful you agreed to do this.
No, and I'm happy to do it because I'm in a much better place, but I'm also still very much so traumatized. Like I embrace that, right? In the sense that I've made it through, and I find that other people would do well, right? To think about that. And I would say, like, to person listening to this, like, please just go see a psychiatrist, right? If you've had some sort of trauma, right? Childhood trauma, rape, incest, any of those things.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how valuable it is for me to be able to talk about with this to you, right? I'm in a much better place to be able to talk about this. And only when you're able to really talk about it in such an open way to people, do you then begin to put the pieces back together for yourself.
Yeah.
If you can't talk about it, it's very much so still a problem.
How do you live your life now?
So I live a life much more simply, I was one of these, type A, overachieving Ivy League bankers, doing my thing in New York City, right? Living the dream. At least that's what I thought, right? But my trajectory for my life and for my career has changed significantly, mainly because I think at some point I just decided it's very important for me that I do the things that I really want to do, right? And I've been given a second chance and a third chance in life, right, for this. So, I mean, I'm on borrowed time and I'm so loving it, right? And I just see how so many other people live their lives, like, constrained by the idea that I need to sit in this cubicle and, work until I'm 65 for my 401k plan, as if like that's living. And there's so many things that people want to do and will have wanted to do that they think, oh, I'll do it when I'm 65. And I refuse to live that way now. Like, I have just so embraced the idea that I have given us another lease, that there were some things that I just really wanted to do that, like, I've just focused on doing some of those things, I
think it's not really a trait of people who have been through hardships or, traumatic experiences, that all of a sudden it makes you realise what's really important. And it's not to have status and money and being a banker in Wall Street or whatever else, you see it to be. It's about the people you spend time with. It's about, as you said, maybe living a simpler life, but that's fulfilling.
It is. I mean, I could have spent the last 20 years, like accumulating big salaries and all that, and those things just don't. I mean, I get that. Some people want that for their lives. Great, go do it, right? There's, time is precious. Tomorrow is not promised. There's some things that you want to do, Sophie, that you need to just go out there and just do it, right? Because you're not getting any younger, right? And you have some goals for yourself that you want to do. And sometimes you just have to put the stake in the ground, and just say, listen, I always wanted to be that cello person, I'm buying the cello tomorrow. I don't care what anybody else says, right? This was something that I just am passionate about, right? Pursue your passions, you will find a way to make it, And
I think this is another thing. A lot of the time, the reason why people stay in, the good job, whatever it is also because they're scared of what other people are going to say. Where when you have been through a traumatic experience where your life could have been endangered or was endangered, all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what other people think.
So that is so important, right? It's so freeing in many respects, right? To just not care about what other people think. And that comes with some downside potentially, but I also think that other people who just take off those shackles, right, realize, this person is just like really doing what they really want. They're obviously very passionate about it. They bring the energy to it. No, okay. Like, you know what? Like, I like that. And I think that has been part of the energy that has really fueled a lot of my own life. People find me to be very passionate about the things that I do and that I'm involved with. but I also think that I've just taken a lot of time to cultivate positive energy in my life. You know, I want people to know that those traumatic experiences have really helped me to get to a point where I just gravitate to positive energy. You know, I don't need any more negative energy around me, and my own spiritual journey, you know, for what I think and how I want my life to be lived has been, it's been a blessing, you know, have been through some of that stuff to take stock of, listen, you know, you've only got a limited amount of time that you're here, right? Make an impact. You can make an impact, right? And you don't need to wait until you're 70 and you have a big fat bank account to do that, right? You know, there's so many little things where I see people that are just stuck in bad places in their lives.
And just not happy.
Just not happy. I speak to people all the time on the street and say hello, right? They walk by me, you know, with an attitude, and I'm thinking, you know what? Like, you're so lost, right? You didn't even say hello back to me, but you know what? I had so much joy just saying hello to you, right? And whether you picked up on that joy or not, you heard me. And I said hello, and I feel great about it, right? Whatever is happening in your head, right? But you got my hello, and somehow or another, that actually somehow in you, you probably smiled, right? And I said hello, you know? So it's on you for whatever you do with that positive energy. But you know what? I'm glad I did it.
Right. Do you know what? It's been lovely talking to you, and I can't thank you enough to share that experience. I know it's slightly different from what we normally do, but I think that it's really important to have this kind of story shared.
Well, I think it is. And I think what you're doing on your podcast, you know what I mean? Talking with people about issues related to how they overcome these things is really important. I'm happy to have shared this with you, but I also think that there's someone out there that's going to have listened to this, right? And will be better for that, you know? And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm happy to talk about this. And I encourage anybody else who may have had some sort of traumatic experiences to try to get to a very good place for themselves. It's actually doable. And with the right people around you and the right medical services, it's important that people understand that, you know, you can turn traumatic experiences into positives into your life.
Yeah, definitely. RJ, thank you so much. And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie.